With his hands clasped together, he took a deep breath and looked between Bambi and Mama D, understanding how much was at stake because he had seen the public's outpouring of love and the fans' passionate requests. "We need to talk," he said, in a firmer but softer tone than usual, and Bambi's eyes begged as her head. "What is it? What's happening?" Dr. Mitchell sighed deeply and raked his fingers through his graying hair. "Scrappy's latest test results have come back, and they don't look good. Something is wrong. Lil Scrappy was supposed to be improving, but now? The physicians just delivered the devastating news. His latest test results are not excellent, worse than anyone had expected. Suddenly, things are different. In the hospital room, there is tension. Machines beep urgently, doctors talk softly, and Scrappy's family. They're terrified. Mama D grips her phone, trying to hold back her tears. Bambi is looking at the doctor, standing still, her hands shaking, and she is waiting for answers. But the worst part, the doctors don't have any. No one knows why Scrappy's health is deteriorating so quickly. His pulse rate is erratic, his respiration is poor, and the medical personnel are unsure of what to do. His family's only option at this point is to pray. Will Scrappy be successful? Or is something far more dire on the horizon? Watch as we break down everything, including the shocking details of his test findings, the emotional reactions of his family, and the doctor's last-ditch attempts to save his life. The update that no one expected was this one. The atmosphere of the hospital was tense, and the intensive care unit was filled with a stifling mixture of antiseptic and fear. The constant beep of the monitors filled the room, a somber reminder that every second mattered. Lil Scrappy lay motionless in the hospital bed, his chest hardly rising and falling under the weight of the equipment holding him steady. Once vibrant and full of life, the rapper was now a fragile individual caught in a life-or-death situation. His breathing was labored, his ordinarily assured face was pale, and his condition was deteriorating every second. Bambi sat next to him, trembling as she held his hand. Her normally immaculately manicured nails had chipped due to the tension of the past several days. Her eyes were swollen from constant crying, and her voice was raspy from whispering pleas that seemed to go unanswered. "You promised me that you wouldn't leave me," she said, pressing her fingers to his cheek in the hopes that he would move. "Scrappy, baby, please, you have to fight." Even though she seemed to be holding herself together with her arms crossed tightly, her occasional sniffle showed her broken heart, and she rocked slightly on her feet and muttered to herself, "Lord, don't take my son." Mama D, the fierce matriarch who had always been a rock, stood near the door and watched with lustrous eyes, but all she could do was watch helplessly after fighting for her son all her life and shielding him from the outside world. Not in this way. Even though he had previously delivered bad news, this case made him feel different. The door creaked open, and the lead physician, Dr. Mitchell, entered the room. His normally calm and collected countenance was suddenly etched with concern and fatigue. Everyone felt as though a weight had been placed on them as a thick silence descended upon the room. Mama D's hands clenched into fists as she took a sharp breath. "How awful." The doctor hesitated, then said, "We have been closely monitoring his heart, and there are signs that the strain is getting worse. His liver function has significantly deteriorated. His oxygen levels have dropped again, and his kidneys are under a lot of stress." Bambi shook her head in disbelief. "However, you said yesterday that he was improving. How could that have happened so fast?" Dr. Mitchell sighed sympathetically. "That is the unpredictable nature of circumstances like his. Sometimes the body shows indications of recuperation before unanticipated problems arise. It's a battle, and right now it's getting harder." With tears streaming down her cheeks, Bambi gripped Scrappy's hand tighter. "But what does this mean? What are your thoughts? The idea that you're idle?" Dr. Mitchell's expression darkened. "We're doing everything we can. However, if his condition doesn't improve the following day, we may need to consider more serious measures." "Like what?" Mama D's voice was sharp, her maternal instincts screaming to the surface. The doctor hesitated, then said, dialysis in an emergency, a potential transplant if things go worse, and we may need to consider putting him on life support if his heart continues to fail." "No!" Bambi cried out in a raw voice, filled with dread and grief. Mama D took charge, her protective instincts taking over, and she remarked, her voice shaking but firm, "My son has been through too much to just give up now. That is not possible. Scrappy is a combative person. This is not how he is going to die. He'll be successful. He has to." Dr. Mitchell nodded gravely. "We're doing everything in our power to make sure that happens," he added, turning back to the equipment after taking one final look at Scrappy's vitals. "But I need both of you to prepare. The next 24 hours will be critical." Already, the outside world was reacting to the hospital. Social media was ablaze with concern, and the news was in a frenzy. Fans rushed to Instagram and Twitter in a desperate search for developments. A worldwide fad was #PrayForScrappy. Celebrities, personal friends, and other musicians were posting heartfelt messages pleading with everyone to send prayers and positive energy. Even others who had previously disagreed with Scrappy were putting aside their disagreements to provide their assistance. The hospital room felt oppressively tense. The quiet between Bambi and Mama D was laden with unsaid anxieties. Bambi finally made a statement. "We need to call everyone," she said resolutely, "and we need every prayer we can get." Mama D nodded and pulled out her phone. "We're doing more than just praying. We are fighting." The constant beeping of the machines around Scrappy was a reflection of how serious the situation was. As the night went on, one concern remained. Would prayer be enough to save him this time? The stress in the hospital was unbearable. Every second appeared to last forever because of Scrappy's fragile state. His fate was in jeopardy, and the only sound in the room was the beeping of the monitors. Bambi wiped away her tears and tried not to cry, but the stress of the situation was wearing her down. Despite her strong demeanor, Mama D was crying on the inside. Outside the hospital, the situation was just as dire. The news of Scrappy's deteriorating health had spread widely. Fans had gathered outside the hospital, praying, holding candles, and hoping for a miracle, desperate to hear any new information. Paparazzi with flashing cameras swarmed reporters anxious to get any inside scoop. The media was going berserk, with every major outlet covering the news. The headlines screamed, "Little Scrappy's condition is becoming worse, and the family is in despair. Doctors' worst fear, will Scrappy survive?" Breaking, Lil Scrappy might need life support. Scrappy's closest friends, Kirk Frost, Rashida, and Young Jock, came in through the open door, their faces white with anxiety, and they rushed to Bambi and Mama D. "Hey, what on earth is going on?" Young Jock demanded, her voice shaking with urgency. "I thought he was getting better." Bambi shook her head, unable to come up with anything to say. Mama D took a deep breath and stated, "The doctor said his organs are struggling, and his heart is under too much pressure." Rashida gasped and grabbed her mouth. With a step forward, Kirk Frost stroked Bambi's shoulder and said, "Oh my God, this isn't possible." Bambi's eyes welled up with tears as she spoke. "All I need is for him to wake up. For Scrappy, we have everything you need. We are available to you." Everyone held their breath as they froze as Dr. Mitchell reappeared, his countenance blank. "He must fight for me," he replied slowly. "We've done further tests." Pausing to examine Scrappy's unconscious body before going on, "The results, they don't promise anything." Bambi was really about to pass out. Kirk grabbed her and restrained her. "What does that mean?" "Croaking," she said. With a sigh, Dr. Mitchell's eyes were serious. "His kidneys aren't working as properly anymore. His heart beats erratically. He may have total organ failure if this continues." There was a collective gasp in the room. Young Jock balled his fists. "No, dude, this is incorrect. You guys must be able to do something." "Doctor." Mitchell nodded his head. "We need to wait for his body to respond before we proceed with high-dose therapies and dialysis. If it doesn't, we may need to consider putting him on life support." "No!" Mama D screamed, her voice breaking. My kid is strong. No machines are necessary for him to live. Dr. Mitchell softened his expression. I am aware that this is difficult, but we are running out of choices. The room became silent as the effect of those words took hold. Then suddenly, the cardiac monitor started beeping strangely. Bambi turned her head toward the TV. Dr. Mitchell rushed to the patient's bedside as nurses streamed into the room, asking, "What's going on? What's the matter?" Young Jock yelled, "His pulse is pounding. Take action." Panic is starting to set in. The nurses hurriedly adjusted machines and injected medications. The stress was unbearable as everyone watched, their hearts pounding in time with the unpredictable beat on the screen. Hours went by quickly, but finally the beeping stopped. "All right, we have him steady," Dr. Mitchell said. "That being said, this suggests that the situation is urgent." Bambi collapsed onto a chair, burying her face in her hands. With a cry, "This is impossible. I can't let him go." Mama D knelt beside her, her hands clasped together. "Baby, we're going to fight. We're going to fight with all of our might. We won't lose him." Young Jock paced the room and shook his head. "This isn't as things should be. It doesn't seem real." Then, as if the universe had heard them, Scrappy twitched his fingers and his eyelids moved slightly. Bambi gasped and said hard. His eyes hardly opened, and his voice was barely more than a whisper, and everyone rushed to join him. "Bam? I'm here, baby," Bambi said, choking on his hand as she sobbed. "I'm here." Scrappy struggled to look him in the eye. His breathing was shallow, and his voice was feeble. "Then what's happening?" "Doctor." Mitchell gently stepped in. "You've been in the intensive care unit, Scrappy. Your body is fighting hard." Scrappy swallowed, trying to understand. "Am I going to die?" Bambi quickly shook her head and said, "No, no, my love. You'll be okay. You just need to go to sleep." She wiped away her tears, Mother D. Scrappy faked a tiny smile and said, "Boy, you scared the living daylights out of us. I remain here." Everyone experienced a fleeting sense of relief. Dr. Mitchell's face stayed serious. "Scrappy, you need to put in even more effort. The next day will decide everything." Scrappy blinked slowly. "I got you," Bambi said, kissing his forehead. "That's my man." But just as hope was beginning to rise, the machines were blaring. Alarms screamed again. Scrappy tensed, and his breathing became erratic. Dr. Mitchell's face turned white. "He's abandoning us again." Panic broke out throughout the room. With uncertainty weighing heavily on the hospital room and the sound of the beeping devices breaking the eerie calm like a threatening clock ticking away, the nursing staff raced. The battle was far from over. It was only getting started, and this time it was life or death. Every beep and machine noise was a reminder that Lil Scrappy's time was running out. The once bright rapper who had captivated the world with his energy now seemed to be a fragile shell fighting for survival, his chest barely rising with each shallow breath. Bambi sat next to him, her hands shaking as she held Scrappy's limp hand. Her once immaculately manicured nails had become chipped and broken. Her heart ached every second. Her eyes were swollen from crying. Mama D, the matriarch who had always been Scrappy's strongest ally, paced back and forth at the edge of the room, her face etched with worry, her hands so tight on her phone that they whitened her knuckles, her stomach twisting in terror every time the monitors beeped, and she muttered, "Please, Scrappy, you promised me." She had always been a rock, but now she was helpless to do anything but watch as her son's life was in danger. The world was in a panic outside the hospital, and fans were begging for Scrappy's recovery and offering prayers on social media. With hashtags like #FightScrappy and #PrayForScrappy taking over Instagram and Twitter, she muttered prayers to herself, but she knew deep down that faith alone would not save him at this point. We all watched, prayed, and hoped for a miracle, but on the inside, things were different. The doctors had just delivered devastating news. His friends, fellow artists, and even those who had previously argued with him sent heartfelt messages asking their followers to remember him. But just yesterday, you said he was improving, Bambi said, her voice trembling as she asked the question that had been on everyone's mind. Mitchell had just interrupted with the most recent test results, which were unexpected. Scrappy's liver condition had gotten worse, his oxygen levels had dropped again, and his kidneys were barely surviving. He could feel the strain mounting on his already troubled heart. Dr. Mitchell took a deep breath, sadness gleaming in his eyes. How did this happen? How could it have changed so quickly? Sometimes the body will give false indications of recuperation. It might not be predicted all the time. Even though his organs had improved somewhat, issues have recently surfaced. His body is battling, but it is not enough. Mama D responded incredulously and angrily. What do you mean? It's not enough? You're telling me that you're at your limit? How should we proceed? Dr. Mitchell hesitated, his expression darkening. Even though we're doing everything we can, we may need to take more serious measures because his condition is growing worse. If he doesn't stabilize in the next 24 hours, we may have to consider emergency dialysis or perhaps a transplant. And if his heart continues to fail, we may have to put him on life support. No, Bambi began sobbing hysterically as her voice cracked with raw anguish. Mama D stepped up, her protective instincts taking over, saying, "My son has been through too much to give up now. You can't do that. He is a combative individual. This is not how Scrappy is going to die. He's not going anywhere. We will fight. We have to." Dr. Mitchell nodded gravely at the audience. As the doctor left the room, the quiet between Bambi and Mama D grew more intense. We're doing everything we can. The next 24 hours are crucial. We have to be prepared for anything. The situation was weighing heavily on them, and neither of them knew what to say. Fans continued to send encouraging messages, but the tone had shifted as news outlets carried stories with headlines like, "Doctors fear Scrappy's life is on the line," and "Lil Scrappy's condition worsens. Family desperate." Recovery was no longer the focus. They both knew that time was running out and that their only options were to wait and pray. The media circus outside continued to intensify as reporters frantically sought out any information as paparazzi cameras flashed outside the hospital. Now it was a question of survival. Bambi was at her breaking point. She stood up and said resolutely, "Everyone must be called. As many prayers as possible are needed. We have to fight. This is not the moment to leave him." In spite of her own emotional difficulties, Mama D nodded in accord. "We're doing more than just praying. We are fighting. We won't leave him." Bambi pulled out her phone and called her family and close friends. Despite the seeming lack of hope, she had faith that Scrappy's spirit would live on via his loved ones. And that love, those prayers, had to be enough. It had to be. There was too much tension in the room. The buzzes and beats of the equipment around Scrappy reminded him of his vulnerability all the time. Bambi's hand clenched around his each time the machine sounded. She could not let go. Not at this moment. Not when he needed her the most. Then the miraculous happened. Scrappy's fingers twitched. It was hardly noticeable, a tiny movement that could have gone unnoticed. But to Bambi, it was everything. She leaned closer, gasping, her heart pounding in her chest. Hard. Her voice was hopeful as she muttered. Scrappy's eyes flickered open and closed, unable to focus. His voice was barely audible, but it was enough. "Bam?" He breathed heavily as he whispered. Bambi cried. Her heart swelled with relief. "I'm here, baby, right here." She sobbed violently and kissed him on the forehead. Mama D knelt by her son and wiped away her own tears, saying, "Don't worry, you will be fine. Just take a nap." "You scared the hell out of us, boy." Scrappy's lips formed a tiny smile. "I stay here." The room emitted a collective sigh of relief, but Dr. Mitchell remained at the doorway, skeptical, and stepped forward, his face grave, saying, "Scrappy, you have to keep fighting for us." Even though Scrappy was fatigued, he mumbled, "I understand you," and said, "Everything will be decided in the next 24 hours." But just as the tiniest glimmer of optimism was beginning to emerge, a series of strident beeps, louder than before, sounded from the machines. As Scrappy's body tightened, his chest rose and fell in rapid, uneven breaths. The medical staff rushed into the room, their faces pallid, to try to stabilize him. His pulse is beating. Fear pierced Dr. Mitchell's voice as he screamed. Nurses flooded the room, altering devices, injecting medications, and working together with a sense of urgency that only came with life or death situations. We must move quickly. Bambi felt sick to her stomach. What's happening? Her voice broke as she sobbed, and young Jock, standing in the corner, could no longer control his emotions. Do something. His voice trembled with fear as he screamed. In a matter of seconds, hours went by. Everyone prayed for the heart monitor to stabilize while they kept their eyes on it. After what felt like an age, the beeping eventually stopped. The doctors all exhaled collectively, their faces gloomy but relieved. Doctor Mitchell looked at Bambi and Mama D. We have stabilized him for the time being, but this is just the beginning. He's in critical condition, so we have to be ready for anything. Bambi collapsed onto a chair with her head in her hands. I can't allow him to leave. I can't. Mama D knelt beside her and took her hands in hers. He won't be lost. We are going to fight. We'll make sure he gets past this. The battle was far from over. It was only beginning. This is not just another update, it's a fight for Lil Scrappy's life. For the next 24 hours, every prayer counts. If you believe that support is powerful, please let the world know by leaving a comment below. Let's help Scrappy and his family through this very difficult period. For the latest updates on this shocking situation, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We'll keep you informed at every stage of the narrative. Stay informed, stay in contact, and never forget Scrappy.